Where do you find good information about the core stuff of Christianity? What do we mean? How do we know? And what difference does it make? As a Baptist minister, I've summarised it onto just one page for you. In this series, I'll walk it through so that you can make a well-informed decision about life's core stuff. Welcome back to the one pager. We're coming to the red ring, the Saviour, but the Saviour begins with these two red arrows denoting the foreshadows of the Saviour in the law and the prophets, the Old Testament in the Bible. But first, how do we know the Bible is reliable, that it hasn't changed over time, that we're reading what was originally written? Well, one good answer is maps, manuscripts, archaeology, prophecy, and storyline. Maps. Manuscripts. We use the same three tests for the reliability of any ancient manuscript. How many manuscripts? The more the better. How soon after the originals were they copied? Sooner the better. How similar are they to each other? The more similar the better. And these are the results, including the Bible's closest competitors. We have so many manuscripts. For Caesar's Gallic Wars, we have 251 ancient manuscripts. For Homer's Iliad, 1900. And that's the Bible's closest rival. But for the New Testament, nearly 24,000 ancient manuscripts, by far the most of all ancient texts. And we have manuscripts from so soon after the originals. Caesar wrote in the 50s, and the earliest manuscript we have today was copied around 850 AD, which makes 900 years between the original and the earliest manuscript. We have manuscripts from as soon as 100 years after Plato wrote tetralogies. But we have New Testament manuscripts from as soon as 25 years after the originals, such as these papyrus manuscripts here. This means the lifespans of the scribes of these manuscripts overlapped with the original authors' lifespans. All these manuscripts are so similar to each other. When you compare the manuscripts of Homer's Iliad all together, 95% of the text is the same. But when you compare the manuscripts of the New Testament all together, 99.5% of the text is all the same. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1948 was an entire scroll of Isaiah copied as early as the 3rd century BC. This text proved to be virtually the same as an Isaiah manuscript copied 1,000 years later. Scribal tradition was certainly able to preserve texts accurately. Historical scholars agree that on every test, the Bible's manuscript evidence is in a league of its own. No other ancient book has such early and plentiful testimony that what we're reading is what was actually written. If we were to doubt the Bible's reliability, then we'd have to doubt all ancient texts even more. Uniquely, we have an unbroken chain of communication from the events of Jesus that lie at the heart of Christianity, to eyewitness records, to scribes preserving the text, to scholars cross-checking the manuscript evidence, to those translating the text from the original languages, to us. We're the last link in this chain of communication. All we have to do now is read it. And we know that these are eyewitness accounts from textual analysis. The interactions with Jesus are close, prolonged, and detailed. Many witnesses saw these events, and most were alive at the time of writing. Some texts' primary interest is to establish these facts, but other reports come from texts with a different primary interest. Most reports come from people with nothing to gain and much to lose. Plus, we know that these accounts were being carefully recorded within months of the events themselves. And all the New Testament books were written within the eyewitnesses' lifetimes. Modern scholars also cross-check these texts with quotes from other first century writings, and also with other historians from around that time. And scholars also include archaeologists. I've personally visited locations in Israel, and they do match the eyewitness accounts. You can see where Jesus was born, where Jesus lived, taught, healed, places where he could have been crucified, buried, and rose again from the dead, where he ascended from into heaven, and where his spirit descended into his people. The point is, the locations match the eyewitness accounts. So this unbroken chain of communication and the manuscript tests makes this a more reliable historical source than any other of this period. Reality check, the Bible has been reliably preserved for us. As Luke wrote, so that you might know the certainty of the things you were taught. Next time, we'll look at what it actually says, because the prophecies and the storyline indicate that it's more than just a human collection, but a revelation from God. Can that be true? We better reality check that claim too. So join me then on the one-pager where reality checking life's core stuff makes sense.